everyone, I welcome you all to topic Decodified session of Analyst IAS. In this particular session, we will discuss about the topic India's long-term low-emission development strategy. We will have this particular discussion in the following series. First, why in news, followed by key highlights, followed by prelims practice question, followed by mains practice question. But before we start our discussion, I want you all to be informed about very important class of Analyst IAS, which include Polity class, which has already started from 21st of November, and Ethics class, which will start from 5th of December. And along with that, we will soon launch Public Administration optional course for Mains 2023. So you can inquire about any of the following on the given number, and you can also visit our official address, that is in Old Rajinder Nagar Market. So now, let's move on toward our topic of discussion and see why it is in news. Recently, India submitted its long-term climate action strategy to United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change at the UN Climate Conference COP27. So this brings this particular strategy into news. Now we will first discuss in brief about the background of this particular strategy. The Paris Agreement of 2015 required countries to submit a plan demonstrating how they would switch their economy from being reliant on fossil fuel to clean energy sources. This was to include measures to be taken to keep temperature from rising beyond 2 degrees Celsius and preferably keep it at 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, and becoming carbon neutral or achieving the net zero target. As India has already committed to being a net zero by 2070, the deadline to make the commitment was made in 2020, but the pandemic meant deadlines were extended. India is now in a group of 60 countries of the Paris Agreement to have submitted a strategy document to the United Nations. So this is a very great move by India. Now we will discuss about COP27, as it was labelled as Implementation Conference in the sense that countries were determined to solve outstanding question on climate finance. Climate finance refers to the money that developed countries had committed to developing countries to help them turn their economies away from fossil fuel and build infrastructure resilient to the climate shocks and access technologies to enable widespread use of the renewable energy. So this was an important term for COP27. Now we will discuss about the elements of India's low emission strategy. India's strategy underlines the use of nuclear power and hydrogen as critical to transition India into a carbon neutral economy. The long-term low-carbon development strategy underlines India's right to an equitable and fair share of the global carbon budget. The remaining budget for a 50% likelihood to limit global warming to 1.5 degree is 380 gigaton CO2, 1.7 degrees Celsius is 780 gigaton CO2, and 2 degrees Celsius is 1230 gigaton CO2. The journey of the net zero is a 5-decade long one, and India's vision is therefore evolutionary and flexible, accommodating the new technological developments and the developments in the global economy and the international cooperation. India's plan is to maximize the use of electric vehicles, ensure that by 2025 the percentage of the ethanol blended with the petrol increases to 20% from the existing 10%, and make a strong shift of the passenger and freight vehicles to public transport. India will also focus on improving the energy efficiency by Perform, Achieve and Trade, that is PAT scheme, and expand the National Hydrogen Mission and increase the electrification and enhance the material efficiency and recycling. Now discussing about the NDCs and these commitment, The NDCs which India must periodically update are voluntary commitment by the countries to reduce emission by a fixed number relative to a date in the past to achieve the long-term goal of climate agreement of preventing global temperature rising beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. Thus, India's most updated NDC commits to ensure that half of its electricity is derived from the non-fossil fuel sources by 2030 and reducing the emission intensity by 45% below the 2005 level by 2030. And their concrete target, unlike the low carbon strategy, which is qualitative and describes a pathway. So this was about the NDC and these commitment. Now we will discuss various issues related to this particular strategy. The first one is with regard to the funding. Of nearly $100 billion annually committed in 2009, which was to have been arranged for by 2020, less than a third has come in. Much of this, and this has been pointed out by several countries including India, is in the form of loans or come with the condition that increase the economic burden on developing countries. The next issue is clear delivery. There is a demand that developed countries must come up with a new target described in negotiation as a new collective quantified goal with a clear path of delivery and a high amount to the tune of trillions of dollars to account for increased cost of the energy transition. The next issue is loss and damage. This is a proposal to compensate the most vulnerable countries and developing countries who are facing the brunt of the climate change for the damage that has already occurred. The European Union was resistant to announcing a fund this year on the ground that it would take years to materialize and there were other options to get money flowing where it was most needed. The next issue is action plan falling short. It's been at least 2.5 decades since the world decided to restrain its greenhouse gas emission. Latest assessment suggests that current action plans of the country to meet climate goals are falling woefully short. The next issue is rising emission. In the absolute term, the annual global emission are still rising, now touching almost 50 billion tons of the carbon dioxide equivalent. In the decade between 2010 and 2019, the global emission grew by over 1% on average. This is significantly slower than the growth in the previous decade of about 2.6%, but meeting climate target is not good enough. The next major issue is global issues. With regard to economic, amid a deepening energy crisis and prevailing economic gloom, there is a little appetite among the countries to scale up the climate action. And with regard to the Ukraine war, the energy and the economic crisis caused by the Ukraine war is still threatening to undo even the small gain made. The next issue is with regard to the inadequate and unfair response. The response in terms of the emission cut has been inadequate. The rich and the industrialized country, these were the main polluters and hence mainly responsible to bring down the emission, have not met their collective target. And with regard to the developing countries, countries like China or India, which were not major emitters till some time back, have seen as their emissions rise steeply. So these are various issues with regard to the strategy at a global level. Now, with regard to the way ahead for this particular problem, there are two ways. First one is approaching the action plan. First, the climate change is a global problem and it requires cooperation between all the nations. Second, it needs rules that are fair and just for the poor and rich alike. Third, the science is clear that humans are responsible for the global temperature rise and that this increase will lead to more and more variable and extreme weather event, much like what we are seeing now. Fourth, it is possible to estimate each country's responsibility for the stock of emission already in the atmosphere, the historical cumulative emissions that have forced climate change impact. And fifth, the countries that have not yet contributed to the emission will do so in the future, simply because the world has reneged on the need to make global rules that would apply fairly to all. The second way ahead is suggestion by the Emission Gap Report. For a realistic chance to keep global warming emission within 1.5 degree Celsius, annual emission would need to drop from the current level of about 50 billion ton of CO2, equivalent to about 33 billion ton by 2030 and 8 billion tons by 2050, according to the newest Emission Gap Report. Even for meet the 2-degree target, emission have to come down to about 41 billion ton by 2030 and 20 billion ton by 2050. This would require drastic action from all the major emitters. So, we all need to collaborate with each other in order to preserve our environment and undo these climatic change bad action on us. So, this was with regard to this particular topic. Now, we will move on toward our prelims practice question, which says, in the context of India's preparation for climate smart agriculture, consider the following statements. First, the climate smart village approach in India is a part of project led by Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security, an international research program. Second, the project of CCAFS is carried out under consultative group on International Agricultural Research headquartered in France. The International Crop Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics in India is one of the CGIAR's research center. You have to pick up the correct statement. Your options are A, 1 and 2 only, B, 2 and 3 only, C, 1 and 3 only, and D, all of the above. Pick up the correct statement and write it in comment box. I will answer this question in my next video. Now, discussing about yesterday's question. So, the correct answer for this particular question is option B, that is 2 only. Moving on further toward our mains practice question, it says, what is the long-term low emission development strategies? Discuss. So, you can answer this question very easily, as I have already explained this whole thing in this particular video. Write your answer in 250 words and send it to us on our WhatsApp number to get it reviewed. So this is all for today. Stay tuned with Analyst IAS to get further update. Thank you.